In the 2020 Asian American Voter Survey, 262 Filipino Americans and 226 Japanese Americans responded when asked the question, "Have you discussed politics with family and friends?" 173 of the Filipino respondents said yes, whereas 181 of Japanese respondents said yes. So we want to know, is there evidence of a difference in behavior between these two groups? Let's perform an appropriate hypothesis test. And we're going to do this at a 0.05 significance level. So as we go through these steps, we want to first again define our parameters. As we can see, we're talking about answering yes or no questions. So our response variable here is categorical. This is how we know we're going to be using proportions, because we can talk about what proportion or percentage fall within each of these categories. So the two categories we have are the Filipinos, so I'll use P with a subscript of F to represent the proportion of Filipinos. And then we also have the Japanese, so I'll use the subscript of J to represent Japanese. And as we can see, this is the proportion of Filipino respondents who have discussed politics. And likewise, we're going to put the proportion for Japanese who have discussed politics. And what are we trying to test is there a difference between these two groups? So let's find out by writing our hypotheses. We're assuming that there is no difference, so their difference is 0. And we want to see, is there a difference? So if we're just trying to say, is there a difference, we're going to just use the alternative of a not equal to. So we have a two-sided alternative here. Now that we understand our hypotheses and we're comparing two proportions, now we know, again, the method that we can use to compare these two proportions is a two-proportion z-test. So let's go through the steps of how to perform this test using Art of Stat. Here we have the compare two proportions options under the confidence intervals and test comparing two groups. So we will select that. And we don't necessarily have the responses of actual yeses and nos, so we don't want to do individual observations. But what we do have is the summary of how many successes we have for each group. So we're comparing, you can create these group labels if you want, but we're going to compare group 1 is Filipino, group 2 is Japanese. And then based off of what was said in the results, we can see that 173 Filipinos said yes, so that's 173 successes out of the 262. And for Japanese, there's 181 that said yes out of the 226. So we can put those values in here. So if we do Filipino first, that was 262, where 173 said yes. And then for Japanese, it was 226, where 181 said yes. And again, we can leave it as 1 and 2, but I'll just make it clear as Filipino versus Japanese. The type of inference we're doing is a significance test. And as we said, the alternative is a two-sided test. So we have our results. Here is the test statistic of negative 3.47 with a p-value of 0.0005. So we'll just copy this in. So now that we have our results, let's compare our p-value to our level of significance of 0.05. And what do we find is that our p-value of 0.0005 is definitely less than that. So we can write this out as a sentence. So we have, since the p-value is less than 0.05, well, that means our data are unlikely. The probability of seeing our results are unlikely under this null hypothesis, so we're going to reject that null hypothesis. And what does that mean for our conclusion? If the null is not true, it must be our alternative that's true, that there is a difference, that it's not zero. So there is sufficient evidence to show a difference in behavior between the two groups, Filipino Americans and Japanese Americans, and whether or not they discuss politics. With family and friends.